Hello. Okay, should see the desktop and you should be able to hear my voice. Does that seem okay? Me- ah, Let me
Did you
get.
ask the question, Professor?
Yeah, there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Because from my end, it's impossible to say if everything is working. And you can see the desktop and all that, right?
Hmm. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So people are still entering the class. Almost got everybody in. Okay. All right. Okay. So first thing, there's a homework assignment due today. So first, anybody got any question about the homework assignment? It's due this evening.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Can we use like different typing of coding stuff that we haven't talked about in class but we've read about?
What would you need?
Like a for loop?
Not for this one, no.
Okay.
It's not that you can't use a for loop, it's that it really won't help you.
Okay. Well, I mean I did it and I used a for loop, but
But but then you're on the wrong track probably. You can send it to me. You can send it to me and I'll look at it. You're probably making it harder than it needs to be.
okay.
Because there's
Thank
nothing
you.
to count. Pardon me?
Oh, I just said thank you.
Okay. Yeah. See, there's nothing to count here. So I don't see. I mean, you can do anything in a for loops will solve any problem, but sometimes they're the wrong solution. So send it to me and I'll look at it. It might just be that you're making it a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. Okay. So, so you shouldn't need a for loop here. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't use one, but it's probably better to see how to do it without one. Okay. What about other questions about the homework? Anybody have other questions? Yeah.
Is it possible to or do we have to use like an if statement?
No, you shouldn't need
Okay.
one. No. Yeah. This is simple enough that you shouldn't need an if statement. There's no question to ask. Somebody gives you a sentence. What do? You remove the first word. Then you take the beginning of the second word and capitalize it. And you move the first word to the end. Notice there's nothing to ask. You don't have to ask, did they do this or did they enter that? So if you don't have to ask anything, you should need an if statement. So this one definitely can be written without an if statement. It's altogether about 8 lines of code, depending on how you write it. You can write it anywhere from 3 or 4 lines of code up to 8 or 10 lines of code. Okay, and so it's like the last assignment. It really only needs variables. It really is something that only needs well-chosen use of variables and methods in the. Okay, the work is going to be done for you by the methods in the string class. I guess that might be what the real issue is, that the real work should be what method in the string class can do something for you. Okay, so these are your workhorses. Yeah, and certainly, if you need to make something uppercase, this one will do it for you, to uppercase. This thing finds letters for you. So like if you need to know where spaces are, that'll find spaces for you. Okay, a for loop can find a space by what we call walking the string, but that's what this thing does for you. It looks through the string for characters, so use it. Okay, so char at finds things for you. You need to find the space so you know where the first word ends. Trim will remove, remember there's this funny space line. Trim will help you get rid of, trim can be used to solve the funny space line issue. Okay, see trim, but with the leading and trailing spaces removed. Okay, leading and trailing spaces removed. So there's something useful. Okay, so and then substring, when you want to get part of a string, you're supposed to break the input string into pieces. So substring is the main thing for breaking things into pieces. Okay, so these are your tools. Okay, yeah. So you look for things that you can use in here to solve the problem. Okay. All right. Let's see. Other question about the homework. Oh, make sure, remark, make sure you try these tests. Now,
It said something about running a command in it. I don't quite understand how to do that.
okay, so that's this part down here. Okay, so we'll see. Use your keyboard and mouse. Okay, so keyboard and mouse, you're going to be using, you're going to hold down a key while you use the mouse. So that's called shift right clicking. So on the keyboard, you hold the shift key, but on your mouse, you right click. You're supposed to do that on an empty space in the homework 3 folder. So here's the homework 3 folder. I pick an empty space in it. So I'm over here on an empty space. I'm holding down the shift key. You can't see me do that, but I'm holding down the shift key and I right click. And I get this thing called open PowerShell window here. Okay, used to be called, well, sometimes, depending on your version of Windows, see, I have open command window here and I have open PowerShell window here. It used to be Windows had this one. I think maybe your computers might show this one. So I'll click on this one, open PowerShell window here. Okay, and you get this window where you can type commands. Okay, so there's a window here where I can type commands. And then it says to type this command. Well, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So I'm going to copy and paste that. Okay. Now, it didn't do anything here because I don't have my programs written yet. Okay. So I got a bunch of error message. Okay. Windows keeps changing. See if I open command window here. See, there was it ran my 5 tests. See, now here I got error messages because I haven't written homework 3. This is what you're supposed to see. You're supposed to see the output from your test, and what it should look like is this output.
So when we turn in the homework, would you like for us to keep the test in there so you
No,
can try it?
I put them back in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I run your tests and I might change the test, but I have scripts that I run. I run programs to run your programs. So like I compile your programs and I put the test program in there and I run your program with on the test. Okay, now see, it should have said enter a line of text. This is pretending to be a user. What a script is a program that runs other programs automatically. So it's pretending to be a user, okay? So it would answer the question, please enter a line of text. And if you look at what's in the script file, here's the script file. This is where it runs your program. Okay, see what it does is it runs your program reading that file. Then it runs your program reading a file. This is read as read that file. Run your program, read that file. Okay, now if you look at that file, it's one of our test cases. See, this line has a lot of spaces at the end. This line has a lot of spaces at the end. See, there's about that many spaces at the end, which you're going to have to get rid of. Okay, you have to get rid of those spaces. Okay, so that's one of the tests. So the test script says, run your program, pretending to be a user, but instead of there being a user, read what the user would have typed from that file. Okay, then when you run the program, you'll see that you would see these lines, and then you would see the output of your program here, and it should look like this. Okay, so here's the one that remember that was this line has a lot of spaces at the end. Okay, and it ends up being this line has a lot of spaces at the end. This line has a lot of spaces at the end. This. Okay, right. So that was the proper result from that input. Okay. Now there's a lot going on here. you're running a test. Remember, this is a lot like what I showed you, the coding bat. This is, you're watching it sort of happen here, what coding bat would do, where it's going to have to run your code with lots of inputs. Okay, so this script runs your code with lots of different inputs. Okay, so that's what I want to do. I want to run your code with lots of different inputs automatically, so that you don't have to keep typing all this. The inputs are in these little files. Each one input is in each file. Okay, this runs your program 5 times with each one of the different inputs. And then here I collected what the output will show up in a window, but then here I show you what that window should look like. This output window should look like this. Okay. Now, one problem I just noticed, that if you have PowerShell, not CMD, there's another little step you have to make. I'm going to probably update this. If you, let me close that and do it over again. Okay. So the instructions say, use your keyboard and mouse to shift right click on an empty space in the folder and select the pop-up window, open command here. Okay, unfortunately, I think in Windows 10, you won't see open command window here. You'll see open PowerShell here. So here's how you add a little thing to that. Okay, so here's the homework 3 folder. Shift right click. There's the shift right click. Open PowerShell window here. Type CMD. Then type this. So I type 2 commands. I type CMD, hit enter, then I type this, and it does what I want. Okay. All right. So if it's a PowerShell, you need to type CMD first. Okay. Now, if you don't have to do it this way. Here's another approach you can take. Here's the folder. Here's a test case. Open the test case and just copy and paste this into your Dr. Java. So you can just copy and paste this into the input prompt in Dr. Java and make sure you get the right output. Then you can open the next test case. Okay. And you could take this test case, copy it into Dr. Java and run it in, and just copy and paste it into the text box in Dr. Java. When Dr. Java prompts you for input, you can just type this, you can paste this in. Okay. And then you can go to the next input case. Okay. And you can do this one at a time. So you can just copy that and copy and paste that into Dr. Java. So you don't have to run the tests automatically using this script if you don't want to. Okay. If you don't want, if it's not working on your computer, like this script won't work on a Mac because it's written for Windows. Okay. So but you can still use these test cases, and this will show you what the output from each test case is. The output from the first test case should be that. The output from the second test case should be that. The output from the third test case should be this, fourth one, and this one for the 5th one. Okay, so you can see what the output should look like. So you can do it 2 ways. You can either, if you can get this test script to run, either you have PowerShell or command on your computer. Probably, I think you guys are gonna have PowerShell. You'll see this open PowerShell. And if it opens PowerShell, then you have to type CMD first for command. Then you could type can type this thing here and run the test file, run the test script. Okay, so eventually, one part of this is getting you to get used to using a computer. As people learning to program, it isn't enough just to learn a programming language. A programming language isn't very useful if you're not using it on a computer. So there's a lot of getting used to using Windows. So a lot of times in these homework assignments, I try to get you to just start getting used to using some feature of Windows. Here, using this command prompt, okay? And that's usually not going to be an essential part of the homework assignment, but it's something to get you start used to these things. If it doesn't work, ask about it, especially if it's not clear what's being asked for here, or if it's not working on your computer. Like if your computer did not have open command window here, then you should ask a question like, why, you said open command window here, but my computer said open PowerShell here. So I think yours will probably say open PowerShell here. Okay, so if you have a question about it, please ask, because these things there's so many different versions of Windows out there too. What I can write, what's true about one version of Windows doesn't have to be true about every version of Windows. But this is part of getting used to starting to get familiar with how a computer works and be able to just do things on a computer besides learning the Java language itself, learning a little about using the computer. But run the tests one way or the other. Make sure you try all those tests and try your own tests too. When you think your code is ready, try it on things, because you will never know if you're really done unless you try it on things. And then you try it on something where you know what the answer should be. So you try it on that, and then you have that one file that tells you what the answer should be. So if you try it on this one tells you for the fifth output was this. When the input was this, the output should be this. Okay? Right? So you need to know, and that's what CodingBat does for you. CodingBat runs your program a bunch of times, shows you what the input was, shows you what the output should have been, and then you see what your output was. This is typical of all programming. You need to have tests that you know what the result should be, and then you compare your output to what the output should be, and that gives you clues to what you did wrong. And that's the way all programming is done these days. You write code, you write tests, or somebody writes tests. You write code, and then you run your code against the tests to see how close you came to the right outputs. And when you got all the right outputs, then you can be confident. You're not perfectly sure, because there's always going to be some mistakes in programs. There could be still mistakes in programs. That's why the more tests, the better. The more tests you have, the more confident you are that when you pass all the tests, your program is correct. Okay. All right. So give the tests a try. If you can get it to work this way, fine. But if you can't get it to work this way, you should still do the test by just copying and pasting from each one of these files directly into Dr. Java. Okay. Well, any other question about running the homework, doing the homework, turning in the homework? Any other questions?
I have one question.
Sure.
For the word test, in the homework, is that extra S at the end of spaces meant to be there, or is that a typo? I wanted to make sure that it isn't something I'm supposed to add in otherwise.
Oh, and that was in one of the tests. Oh, there was a misprint in one of the tests, wasn't there?
Okay, good. It said spaces with two
Yeah,
S.
which one was that? 4, 5?
I think it was 3.
Yeah. Oh, the misprint's in the output.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I didn't.
That's stupid of me. Yeah. See, I caught the misprint in one place, but then I had already run the output. I think what happened was I caught the misprint here after I had run the test, and I forgot to fix it over here because I had already made this file, and then I realized I had a mistake over here.
That's what I assumed. I was just checking to be sure.
Yeah, and that's the kind of question to ask. As you work in code, you'll realize that there's mistakes everywhere you look. If you start looking around the internet, you'll see mistakes everywhere because it's so hard to get all this stuff lined up. Yeah. So I had these test cases, and I had a misprint in that one. I ran the results, got this output file, then saw the mistake in here, fixed it in here, and forgot to fix it in the output file. Yeah. So that means I fixed this after I had run this. Yeah. So that shouldn't be there. Yeah. And I'll try to remember to fix that this evening, just so that this stuff, every time if somebody points out a mistake, I try to fix it right away. So I'll try to remember to fix, it's in the output one, right? Yeah, the mistake is in the output one. Okay. And please send me an email if you see these, because if I get the email, then I remember to fix it right away. Sometimes if we notice these things in class, I forget to go fix it after class. So send me an email, even remind me that there's a misprint in the output script, in the test script output file. Okay. All right. Now let's see. That's the homework assignment. The other issue to deal with is the exam review. Remember, you'll have the exam after. The exam will be you'll have all evening, all afternoon and evening on Monday to do the exam. Okay. So anybody have any questions about this stuff? Okay.
Are we just going to be, when we submit it to you, are we going to be writing these things out, or do you want it all in a, file, or are you going to want any kind of, Java file for
No,
anything?
no, you can write it with pencil and paper. I mean, I'll give you an exam that you can download, and you can write your exams in that, you can write your answers in that exam. If you can print the exam, if you have a printer, you can print it and write your answers right on that paper. That's the easiest way to do it. And then scan it and with your phone and upload it back to Brightspace. If you don't have the ability to print, you can just write your answers on a piece of paper. Yeah.
Okay.
If you feel like typing your answers into into Dr. Java, or for example, it's okay with me. If you can make your answers look okay in Dr. Java, because you can just type answers. But I think for most people, the easiest thing would be to print the exam and write the answers on the exam paper, then scan them in. And if you can't print it, to just write your answers up. Write each answer on a page. Don't try to cram all your answers in one page. That'll make it very hard for me to read it. Try to write your answers, one problem per page, and then scan them in and upload them. And if you can use Dr. Java, to write answers, that would work. The only thing, there's a couple problems where you have to write a picture. Okay. There's a couple problems that ask you to draw. Where is it? A memory diagram. Okay. Now, you can do memory diagrams in Dr. Java, but it's real painful. Oh, Dr. Java's hung again. See, it's a little spinning wheel. Every once in a while, it starts up with a little spinning wheel. I don't know if this is happening to you, but I have to close it and then just start it again. And the second time it starts, it always starts okay. But for some reason, the first time it starts, I get a little spinning wheel. Okay, see, now it's okay. And that spinning wheel seems to stay there forever. Okay, you could do things like, you could say I have a variable Bob, and then this is what we call ASCII art. It's, a lot of us do this in our programming. This is a lot of times the way we document things. Here's a box. That's a variable. Okay, there's a box. Okay, and what's that box do? It points to an object. So here's another box. Maybe this is a turtle object. Whoops. I may draw a big box for a turtle object. Okay. Now, you can do this stuff. We call this ASCII art. Yeah. And a lot of, if you go, eventually, as you learn more about programming, you'll see people doing this all over the place, drawing pictures in their text file, in their code to document things. Okay. So, you can, but it's a lot easier to draw that on a piece of paper with a pencil and a pen. But if you wanted to, you could draw these pictures in, by making little boxes like this. There's even a website that'll draw these for you. See if I can find it. Yeah. Isn't it great? Yeah. Then you can copy and paste those into, it'll actually, it's like a Illustrator for ASCII art. Yeah. It draws arrows for you. Yeah. So so there's all kinds of, if you could literally do the whole exam in Dr. Java if you wanted to. And some people find it kind of fun to do this. It has the advantage that you just have everything in one place that you could save, for your own record. Okay. So, but like I say, I think the easiest way to do it would be if you have a printer, take the exam that I upload to Brightspace, you download it, print it out, write your answers on the pages, then scan it back in. If you don't have a printer, just get blank sheets of paper and write your answers on the blank sheets of paper, one problem per page, and then scan them in and upload them back to Brightspace. And if you want, you could do all your work in any editor. Like you could do it in Word. You could do the exams in Word because Word will let you draw pictures. Okay, so you could produce a Word document because Word is actually pretty good at drawing pictures. I think Word has a basic picture drawing tool built into it. PowerPoint. Okay, so if you want to produce a document like that, that's fine with me. Especially this is a programming class. Anybody who can use a tool to do something is good. Using a tool is great. Okay, so if you want to write your answer, let's see. If you want to write your answer using Word or PowerPoint, those would be fine. Then you can just upload a Word document to Brightspace when you're done. Okay, so okay, easiest is probably going to be print it out, write your answers on a piece of paper. Your answers will just be things like short answers. Some of these problems ask you to just write a couple sentences of explanation. There's these couple that ask for a short picture. Like in this review, there's 3 that ask for a little picture, a memory diagram, like the Java Visualizer draws. And then others are things like fill in the blanks. Where was it? There's one where you have to write a couple lines. You have to fill in a couple lines of code. Okay, so on your if this was the problem and you printed this out, you just need to write a couple lines of code in that space there. That's how in pencil or pen, you would just write a couple lines of code right there. You wouldn't have to have this as a complete program that I can run. I wouldn't want that. You would just write a couple lines of code right there. Okay, on your or if you printed out the problem, you could write a couple lines of code right there. If you couldn't print out the problem, you would just say, for problem 9, my answer is, and then you'd write down the couple lines of code that you write there. Okay, so if you didn't have a printer to print this out with, you can just say my problem 9 answer is, and then write what you would have written there. Okay, it's a bit of a mess. We have to find ways to make this work. So any questions you have as you're going through it, please let me know. Like I'll be paying attention when you're working on the problem on when that day. So if you have questions while the exam is, while you're working on it, you can send me emails, maybe call up on Zoom and ask questions. Okay, anybody got questions about specific problems in here? Any one of the problems or any topic that anyone's got a question about? Okay, if you got questions, you can send them to me by email. Okay. Okay, so if questions come up, send me emails, and then, okay, now what we need to do today, we have one more topic to talk about on if statements, this thing here. We're something called else if statements. Okay, we've talked about if statements. We did if and if else statements. Okay, we talked last week about simple if statements. Like this is actually an if else statement. If this is true, you do that line of code. Otherwise, you do that line of code. You only do one of those 2 lines of code. This is either true or false. It can't be anything in between. It has to be either true or false. If it's true, you do the first line of code. If it's false, you do the else line of code. That's an if-else statement. Then we also had, can't remember which one of these had. There is just an if statement. Maybe it was in the last example. Yeah, so you could just have an if statement without an else. Okay, so you have if statements, if else statements, and now we want to talk about something that people often refer to as else if Okay, see, it's flipped around. What now? There's really no such thing as an else if statement. So it's really kind of a trick, but people refer to it as else if. Another thing people refer to it as nested if statements. Okay, so let me show you what the idea is. Okay, so let me open Dr. Java. Okay, and I have a file here on my desktop. I want to open this file. Nope, not that one. Sorry. This one. Okay, here's an outline of what we want to talk about. Here's our starting point, an if-else statement. So if something's true, you put any code you want in here. If this thing's false, you have code you put in here. You can put anything you want there. You can put anything you want in this place here. So one thing you could do is you could put another if statement in there. So here's an example of putting an if statement inside of an if statement. So we refer to this as nesting if statements. Okay. Now here I nested an if statement inside of the first part of an if statement. Okay. Turns out that that's not as useful as some other things we're going to do. Okay. Okay. So putting an if statement into the if part of an if statement is something you could do, but it's not as useful as the next thing. What if you put an if statement in the else part of an if statement? So that's also another way to nest an if statement. Okay, so you can put if statements inside of if statements two ways. You can put an if statement inside of the if part, or you can put an if statement inside of the else part. They're both called nested if statements because you're nesting one thing inside of another thing. This is not as useful. It's a little bit useful, but this is tremendously useful. This is what we want to talk about. This thing here, this idea here, this is the key idea to a lot of programming problems. An if statement inside of the else part of an if statement. Now, if you look at it, see this thing here? That's where it gets its name, else if. Now, over here, see, when you put this if statement inside that if statement, you don't call this an if statement. This doesn't even have a name. This idea is just not it's not so useful that it needs a name. So the if statement in the first part of an if statement, nesting an if statement in the first part of an if statement, doesn't even have a special name for it. But nesting an if statement in the else part of an if statement has a name for it, and it got called this, else if. Okay. Now, here's one thing we can do with this. Oh, you can keep doing that. See, now that I have an if statement inside of this guy's else, well, what about this else? I can put an if statement inside of the inner else. So I have an else, if, else, and I could do that again if I wanted to. I could take this if statement. I can keep nesting these. Logically, there's no limit to how many times I do this. So I could paste that in and then indent it some more because it needs to be indented because there's one more level in. Okay. Now I've got, and I could keep doing that. Now I could, if I wanted to, I could do now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 nested if else statements, and I can keep on doing that. I could take this one, and you're just putting it inside. You're taking the if else statement and you're putting it inside the next one. And then since it's inside, it has to be indented. And I can change the name. So this is if something else, if some other thing, some okay, so I keep checking different things. We'll see how this works. I'm checking something, then I'm checking something else, I'm checking some other thing, and I'm checking some other thing, and I'm checking some other thing. And we want to see that there's a very specific pattern. This actually solves a very specific problem. Okay, so this is what we're doing. We're working on this idea of sticking if statements inside of the else part of if statements. Okay, now let me show you something else. We saw last week, go back to the code we did last week. See, there's one line of code there. Okay, if I want to put 2 lines of code there, if I want a second line of code there, so remember what I need to do to make that work.
Need the curly braces.
Yeah, you need to lump them together because the rule is there's only one line of code inside of an if statement. Or if we go back to our outline, without the braces, you can only put one line of code there. You're only allowed one line. But if you put the braces, you can put as many lines as you want between the braces. Okay? So with the braces, you can put as many lines as you want. Okay? Now, so with the braces, if you want more than one line, you have to put the braces. Okay. Now, the thing about Java is if you only have one line, you don't have to put the braces. Okay? So if there's only one line, you don't have to put the braces. It's a wise idea to put them there. In the long run, we'll actually tell you that you should always put the braces there. But, well, almost always. Okay, so if you have only one line, it's wise to put the braces, but you're not required to. Okay, now we're about to see that that's an important trick. That's important in what we're doing on the other page. Okay, so when there's only one line of code, the braces are optional. Okay, now go back to over here. What's interesting here is this is actually one line of code. That's actually, by Java's measure, one line of code. You can think of it as a line of code that just looks like this. We don't write it that way, but Java would let you write it this way. Okay, so there's the thing goes in there, and so that's one line of code. If something, do this, else do this other. So it's technically just one line of code. But if it's one line of code, these braces don't have to be there. Okay, if it's one line of code, the braces don't need to be there. Now let me back up and go back to the way it was. Okay, so this is all one line of code. That brace doesn't need to be there, and that brace doesn't need to be there. Oh, but I'm doing the wrong, I'm sorry, I should have been down here. I meant to be down here. Like, same thing's here, true. See, this is one line of code sitting inside this else. So for the same reason, this is one line of code. This brace doesn't need to be there, and this brace doesn't need to be there. Okay. Now you see that, but if that brace isn't there, why not just back this up onto the line with the else? Okay, that's what people do. The brace isn't supposed to be there. So once you remove the brace, so it looked like this. Okay, here's the else part. Here's what the else holds, but what it holds is one line. Well, if it's one line, I don't need the brace. And if I don't have the brace there, why not just go ahead and back this guy up into that line? And now if this is all in one line, why does this need to be indented? Why not just go ahead and unindent this? And now I have something that's easier to read. And now we have what we call an else if statement. So we read this as if this, else if this. Okay. Now do that down here. Watch what happens if I do it over and over again. Here's a block of code. It's one line actually sitting in this set of braces. Since it's one line, that brace doesn't need to be there. And that brace doesn't need to be there. But now since there's no brace there, why not just back this up into that line? And then you can just outdent this thing one level. Okay. But this is all one if statement. This is all one line inside this else. That's all one if statement. So it's one line. So that this brace doesn't need to be there. And this brace doesn't need to be there. And I can go ahead and back this if statement up onto the line above it. But then I don't need these things indented. And now I have the same trick again. This is really all one line of code. From Java's point of view, that's just one single if with some things nested inside of it. But if that's one single if, this brace doesn't need to be there. And this brace doesn't need to be there. And then I keep doing this trick again. I put him on the line with the else, and I get rid of the level of indentation. And then I'm going to do this one more time, because what I have here is one huge if statement that's just one statement inside of this else. So that brace doesn't need to be there. That brace doesn't need to be there. I can back the if up into this line. I can get rid of the one more layer of indentation. And now we get something that's actually amazingly easy to write. We end up with a shape that's real easy to read. If this is true, do this. Otherwise, if this is true, do that. 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 Otherwise, do what's in there. And each one of these is a step after the other. If this is true, do what's there. But then you skip the else. But that else holds everything. So you skip everything. If this is false, you go here. If this is true, you do what's in here and skip this else, but this else holds everything after here. So notice that if any one of these is true, you do what's below it and skip everything else. So this now becomes what we call a mutually exclusive set of cases. If this is true, do this, skip everything else. If this is false, check the next one. If it's true, do this, skip everything else. So you're looking for the first one that's true. If this is true, do this and stop. If this is true, do this, then stop. Otherwise, if this is true, do that and stop. Otherwise, do check for this is true, then stop. Otherwise, check for this is true. If so, do that. Otherwise, then this one is a default case. If none of these are true, then you automatically drop into this one. So if this one's false, 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 then you're down here. This turns out to be a really common pattern. You're checking for, you've got a bunch of cases and you're checking for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cases. Actually, you're checking for 5 cases and a default case, which is everything else. Okay, so I'm actually checking for 5 specific cases, and then if it's not one of the 5 specific ones, this is a catch-all case. This gets used everywhere in programming. This is something that we just constantly do all in all. Now, notice that I'm going to back up with the undo. And look how complicated it looked before I simplified it. They're exactly the same thing. Okay. It started out like this. Yeah, it started out like this. These were, now here it wasn't at all clear, but this was, if this is true, do what's in here and skip everything else. Otherwise, if this is true, do what's in here and skip everything else. Otherwise, check if this is true. If it is, do what's in here. Otherwise, check if this is true. If it is, do what's in here. Otherwise, check this. You know, this says the same thing. It's just that this is much harder to read than see, there's what it looks like, all nicely formatted. Okay, and that's what it looked like. Not quite so. They're actually equal. They're perfectly equivalent. Yeah, but nobody writes it like that. Everybody writes it the way it was before. Yeah, with actually, it's written down here with if something else, if something else, if something else. Okay, so this is what we call nested if-else statements, or well, here I wrote nested if-else statements. Some people call them else-if statements. They're either called nested if-else statements or they're called else-if statements. In the textbook, they refer to them as else-if statements. The textbook referred to them as else-if statements. Multi-section else-if statements. Okay, so you can either call them nested if-else statements or else-if statements, multi-section if-else-if statements. But it's this idea here of going backwards. It's deciding that you can put anything you want in an else statement. If you put an if statement inside of the else statement, this is messed up now. If you put an if statement inside of the else statement, if you put an if statement inside of an else statement, that's a special case. Putting an if statement inside of an if part, not so special. Putting an if statement inside the else part, tremendously useful. Ends up being a really nice pattern. Again, back the if onto the line with the else, back the if onto the line with the else, and then you got something that's actually kind of useful, an else if idea. Okay, now let's look at an example that uses this. Let's look at an example where a real typical example where this would be used. Okay. Let me see. Oh, I forgot to copy that file. Let me get the file we need. Let's see. I think I found, okay. Okay, here's the example. I didn't want to have to type all that in. So I forgot to copy it to the desktop before class, but I didn't want to type this in. Okay, here's the problem. The problem is a real simple, it looks like a dumb problem, but it turns out to be the idea behind it is let's see. I got an arrow on my desktop. I don't know what it means. Quinn, what's the arrow for? Can you unmute?
Yeah, I asked a question when you asked if there were any questions.
Oh, but I didn't hear you.
Oh, okay. Do you have the chat?
Yeah, but it's on a separate screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I see. It's not on my desktop because it would be distracting for it to be on my desktop. So it's on a separate screen off to my right. So I don't
Mm,
always see what's on the chat. That's why I have to, yeah. Unmute yourself if you have a question. Let's see.
okay.
So what? Problems 3 and 4 on the review.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me look real quick. If it's got a simple. Oh, here's what we should do. Take this. This is something you're gonna. I think you should do all the time. Take this code, plug it in the Java Visualizer. Now, the problem was, what does this code print out? Okay, well, let's go ahead and just, you need to get used to reading it, but let's just go ahead and run it. Like on the exam, you won't, so you'll be able to, well, you could, the question is if you run it, but then you have to explain things. Okay, now run this. Oh, I actually I didn't paste it into the visualizer quite right. I really wanted just this part here. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I had a question about that too. So I didn't know if it was more of a trick question, basically, because
No.
they have a string argument there saying,
No, okay,
okay, nothing or
paste it in there. Now visualize it. Okay. Now print. Okay, printed a star. Okay. Now it said print, not print line. So we're right at the, we're still right after that star. Now it prints star. What's /n mean? What's /n?
Is that next line?
Next line. Yeah. So notice it didn't, it says print, not print line, but it has a /n here. So it printed star, and then now it's actually on the next line. Okay. Now where are these 3 stars going to appear? So they're going to appear right below the 2 stars. Okay. Now this had an ln on the end of it because of that. Okay. So where are these 2 stars going to appear?
Line below it.
Right, the line below it, and then they'll put another, but now look, they put the 2 stars in the line below it. But then they do this. What's the /n do?
It'll go to the next line for the next line of for the next stuff
and
they
then
print.
do
Another asterisk.
yeah. So what will this thing print out in words? What does this print out? How many lines does it print out?
2.
2 lines. A double star, then on the next line, a single star. See, a double star and then a single star. Now, where am I? Where is this star going to appear?
By the single star.
Yes, next to the single star, because this didn't have a print line at the end of it. It printed a star, so I'm stuck. The print system is right after that star there. So this star goes at the end of that star there. In a sense, you're right. It is a trick question, but it's a trick question just asking you to read code carefully. Yeah, the idea is that this is what programmers do. You have to read code super carefully. Everything in code counts. Every little comma, every little, this is a print, not a print line. This one's got a slash in the middle of it. Okay, so it's kind of a trick question, but it's not really a trick question because it's what we do all the time. Read code real carefully. Okay, so you have to be able to see what this does and see why it printed that out. So this star was that first star on the first line. This star was that second star on the first line. These 3 stars are actually the second line. These 2 stars are the first 2 stars on the third line. And this is a star on the fourth line. And this is on the fourth line. Notice that you can't, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines here, but there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 lines here. Don't think that that's 1 line of output, 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 that's 1 line of output. That's only true if they end in ln. And even then it's not true because an ln can have a /n in the middle of it. So never assume that this is 1 line of output and this is 1 line of output and this is 1 line of output. You got to really look carefully at them. Okay, now about the next one, let's see. And then the other one was very similar. Take the code, go ahead and put it in the visualizer, let the visualizer show you what it does, but then you have to think about it. Because with the exam, you're going to be asked to explain what's going on here. Okay, this one starts out the same way. it prints the star, but it stays right next, you're still right there next to the star because that was a print and there's no end line. Now this one, that star goes after that one. Then the /n puts you on another line. Then you just keep on going. The plus doesn't really make any difference. You just keep on going. There's 2 more stars. Okay, so put a star on the end of the current line, start another line, and then 2 stars. So it's going to put a star at the end here and 2 stars below it. Okay. Yeah, and make sure you know where all those 4 stars came from. That star, and then those 2. Okay, now where am I? Down here, where is the computer? Where is Java in this output? Is it after this star or down beginning of the next line? Where is it right now? This is print, not print line, and there's no /n at the end of this. So you're sitting at that second star. Okay, so line 5 starts at the end of that second star. So that means this star goes where? This star would be where in the output? Anybody?
Same line.
Same line, it'd be the 3rd star on this line here, on the second line. This would be the 3rd star on the second line. Okay, now I've got a /quote. Okay, now the book talked about escape sequences. The / always means escape sequence. So go back, I'll show you real quick. If you go back chapter 1 of the textbook, there's the chapter 1 of the textbook, there's the section on escape sequences. There's a little table. See, there's the /quote. That's one of the escape sequences. Okay, so this homework problem is about escape sequences. So that is a quote. Now notice that that quote means what? See, this is teaching you to read code character by character. You have to tell me what every single character means. Unlike in English, where you don't have to tell me what a comma or a semicolon means, here you have to tell me what everything means. What does that quote mean? What's it doing in the code?
It prints out everything in between.
No, it doesn't do that. Print prints things out. What does that quote do?
No, it says what is to print.
Well, that's not really what it does because, for example, let me type a different piece of code. See, when you talk about code, you have to be really, really careful. Does that quote tell me what to print?
It tells you the data type.
Tells you the data type. It tells you what?
That it's a string.
It tells you it's the beginning of the string data, right? It tells you it's the beginning of string data. Now you go over here. What's this quote do? What does a quote do in Java? What does this quote do? Does this quote do the same thing that this quote did? There's a quote here and a quote here. Are they doing the same thing?
The first quote begins the string and the second quote ends the string.
Yeah, they do. They play different role. This one begins the string. This one ends the string. Now over here, this one's beginning a string. It happens that I'm printing the string. but that's not what that's not its job. Its job is to say, this is the beginning of string data. Just like here, it has the same job. Here's the beginning of string data. Here the string is being put in a variable. Here the string is being printed. But the role of the quote isn't to say, here's what to print. The role of the quote is to say, here's the beginning of a string. What about that quote? Is that ending the string?
No,
Why not?
there's a backslash that comes right before it.
Right. The escape sequence changes its meaning. The backslash changes, just like a minute ago, oh, right here. See, what's the meaning of the letter N? Well, the letter N is the letter in a word. You can use it in Word. But what happens to this? See, this backslash changes the meaning of the letter N. So you read this as a pair. Backslash N means new line. The slash changed the meaning of this letter. And that's what this is about here, the escape sequences. A slash changes the meaning of a letter. Okay, so over here, that quote says, oh, beginning of string data. This quote back over here is the end of the string data. This quote has been escaped. Its meaning is changed. What's the meaning of that quote?
It's supposed to print the quotation marks.
Yeah, it means print me. See, if it wasn't escaped, well, okay, step forward. See, it printed the quotation mark. Now, suppose I got rid of that slash up here. If I got rid of that slash, then that quote would close the string. It would be the end of the string data. Because that's what, if you have, whenever you have two quotes in a row, one starts the string data and the next one ends the string data. Okay, so over here, I want a quote in the middle of the string. To have a quote in the middle of the string, I have to change the meaning of the quote. So I put a slash in front of it because I need to change the meaning of that quote. Otherwise, its meaning would be end that string. And then here's another quote that's been changed its meaning. Okay, notice, and I keep saying this over and over again, when you read code, you have to start being trained to learn to read it character by character by character. Because don't think this is, like some people think that this is being needlessly picky and silly. And believe me, it's not. You're paid lots of money to write code because it's this picky. People get $80,000 a year to start writing code because somebody has to pay attention to these details. Really, really, really little details. They're everywhere when you write code. When you write code, these little details matter a lot. So you start learning to read code character by character. Beginning of a string, star in the string. Oh, something's being escaped. What's being escaped? The quote mark is being escaped. So I actually print the quote in my string. Then another star, then another escape. Oh, something's being escaped. What's the next thing? It's the quote mark. So I put another quote in my string. Oh, now this quote is not escaped, so it closes the string. That's the end of the string. So that was the end of the string. Now the ln meant I went to the next line. So now output 6 is starting at the beginning of the third line of output. Okay, I'm at 1, 2, 3. I'm in the fourth line of code, but I'm only at the beginning of the third line of output. Now, watch what happens here. Beginning of a string. What's the first thing in the string?
A new line.
A new line. So I'm at the beginning of line 3 of my output, and I have a new line. So what happens?
Goes to line 4.
I'm going to line 4. Yeah. So this skips over line 3. Line 3 ends up being blank. This sends me to line 4. Okay. See, I was after line 5, I was at the beginning of line 3 of the output. Line 3 begins immediately with a /n. That sends me to line 4. Okay, now I'm on line 4. line 4 prints two stars. So line 4 will have 2 stars. And then, oh, now go to line 5, print 1 star, and stay at the end of that line. See, there's no ln here. So this prints out 3 lines, a blank line, a line with 2 stars, then a line with 1 star. See, it printed out 3 lines, a blank line, a line with 2 stars, and a line with 1 star, and it's sitting at the end of this 1 star. Okay, I'm sitting at, right now, I'm doing line 7, and I'm sitting at the end of that star here. Here's the beginning of the string. Something's being escaped. Well, what's being escaped? The escape character itself. That's how you print a slash in your output. Okay. See down here, if you want a backslash in your output, you put // in your string. So that, because otherwise the slashes are part of the escape sequences. So to get a slash that's not in an escape sequence, you need to escape the escape character. And this is why programming gets tricky, because I'm now escaping the escape character. This is the escape character, and I want my output to show a /n. So I have to, if I just try to put a /n in my string, it'll be acting as an escape character. So I have to, it's just like a quote. If I put a quote in my string, it acts as an end of string. Doesn't act as a quote in my string. If I put a slash in my string, it acts as an escape character. But I want this backslash in my output, so I need //. Okay, so over here, this puts a slash after that star there. See, we're still at, that's this star here, is that star there, and we're still on the same line as that star. So we put a slash after that star, then a star, and then there's another escape slash. So we're going to put // at the end of that line there. Okay. So it's a trick. It is a trick question, but it's a trick question to ask you to do something that we do constantly in programming. Read this code character by character by character by character. It's tricky because it's so detail oriented, but it's important because you will see code like this every day that you're programming. You know, you will see things like this. It's just unavoidable. We need to print things out, and we print things out with lots of what we call escape characters and control characters. So this is good practice in reading code really carefully. Yeah, and you don't need the Java visualizer. After you're practiced at this, you can read this and say what it prints out. So print a star, stay on the same line. Print that star right after that star on the same line. Oh, and then go to the beginning of a second line. So now we're on our second line. Print 3 stars on the second line and start the third line. Okay, now we're on the third line. We print 2 stars and go to the fourth line and print 1 star and stay on the fourth line. Then on the fourth line, we print 1 star and go to the fifth line. So I could say that in words and draw it on a piece of paper. I could read that and say in words what it's doing and write it out on a piece of paper. For practicing, put things into the Java visualizer. You know, when you see things over here in the test, when you see things over here, plug them into the Java visualizer to try them out. Yeah, plug them into the Java visualizer to see what they do. Okay. Yeah, you know, here I wrote it as a method, but you can just take what's inside here and put it inside main. See, just I put it inside main to let it run inside the Java visualizer. Okay, so that's one thing about these review problems. Plug them into the Java visualizer as much as possible. You know, like this one, you can plug that into the Java visualizer and then check your output. You know, check what you think goes in A, B, and C. Okay, and you'll know if you got this output or not. So just, you know, take that and put it into the Java visualizer and then figure out what you think goes here, here, and here. Make sure that you get the right output. Okay, so use the Java visualizer to check what you're doing, to check that you're doing the right things. Okay, all, and you don't have to use the Java visualizer. You can use Dr. Java too, but you would want to take this and put it somewhere where you can run it. Java visualizer is the easiest. Dr. Java is also, if you want to save it. So if you'd want to save it, Java visualizer doesn't let you save things so much. Dr. Java will let you save things. So you might want to use Dr. Java because it lets you save things. Okay. Okay. Now let's go back to the example we were doing. Okay. Let me show you what this thing does. The problem here is you want a user to type in numbers 1 through 5. Okay. And then you want to tell, well, if you typed in 1, you want to figure out what number they typed. Okay. So this code just says, if you typed 1, you entered 1. If you typed 2, you entered 2. If you typed 3, you entered 3. Okay. Looks like it's right. And it works, but I'll show you what's wrong with it. So let me run this. Well, let me actually, to see what's really wrong with this, I want to run it in the Java visualizer. I'm going to take this thing and move it up to the Java visualizer. Now, I want input to the Java visualizer. To get input to the Java visualizer, I need to put a number in here. So there's the input for the scanner. See, the scanner is going to read from system.in. The Java visualizer doesn't talk to your keyboard. It talks to this box here. So that's where the standard in goes. See, the system.in is this box here. Okay. Now, the user types in a 2. So create the scanner object, the scanner, then print an output, print a message to the user, enter an integer between 1 and 5. Now read their input. So I read what they typed, and they say, oh, the user typed in 2. Okay. Now I check if n equals 1. Now 2 is not 1, so they didn't enter 1. 2 is 2, so they entered 2. Fine. So now I print a little message. You entered 2. Now here's the problem. If they entered 2, they couldn't have possibly entered 3. So why am I checking for them if they entered 3? And if they entered 2, they couldn't have entered 4. See, there's only one number they could have entered. So if they entered 2, they couldn't have entered 4. Why am I checking it? Why am I checking 5? Why am I checking that they? Now this is the catch-all that says if you didn't enter 1, you didn't enter 2, and you didn't enter 3, and you didn't enter 4, and you didn't enter 5, I give you a little error message. Notice that this works, but it's silly to be if you know the input's 2, it's silly to be checking for all these others. So here's a fix to that. This is where the else if comes in. I add these else's here. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to add these else's here, but now it reads differently. Now it says, if n is 1, print this. And then otherwise, well, there is no otherwise. If the input was 1, I skip all of this. Oh, and then I need one more down here. Actually, and then down here, I get rid of all this. Now, how does this read? If the user gives me 1, I tell them they entered 1, but then I skip everything else. I don't go check anything else. But if they didn't give me 1, I check if it's 2. If it's 2, I print this, and then I skip the else. Because whenever you have an if the if part's true, you skip the else. So that skips everything else. Because everything down here is nested inside there. On the other hand, if they didn't give me 2, if they gave me 3, I print this. But if it's not, and then I skip everything else. Okay, so now I'm only going to check what I need to check. I'm checking until I find the number they gave me, and I skip everything else. Now this will work real well. This is a very good example of how the nested else ifs work. You've got a bunch of mutually exclusive cases. See now here, n is 2 is going to be true. I print out you entered 2, and then I'm done. See, I skipped all that other stuff. This is a real common thing in programming, that you've got these cases where only one of them can be true. Only one of these cases can possibly be true. So you don't want to just say if this one, if this one, if this one. You want to say if this one, otherwise, if this one, otherwise, or here we say else. Some languages actually write otherwise there, because that's kind of how you think about it. If this is true, do this. Otherwise, check for these other things. But Java writes it as else. The beauty of this is that your programs are faster and they're actually better organized. Because when somebody reads this, they know that this is meant to be only one of these can be true. So if it's this one, or it's this one, or it's this one, or this one, but you're saying to people that there's exactly 5 things that could happen. Actually, a 6th thing, like let me just suppose somebody enters 0. Just one last example. Well, they're supposed to enter a number between 1 and 5, but they entered 0. It's not 1, it's not 2, it's not 3, it's not 4, it's not 5. Now, see, when it wasn't one of those, there's nothing to test here. I'm in the case where none of the above cases worked, so I'm in the default case. And the default case here is we ask for a number between 1 and 5. Notice how it jumped from, when none of these were true, I jump into the default case. Okay, I can have as many of these cases as I want. It's not unusual in real programs to have 20 of these, 15, 20 of them. You could be testing for lots of different things here. Okay, so this is a really powerful, useful idea. And back here, just remember, it comes from taking an if statement and saying I could put an if statement inside an if statement, or I could put an if statement inside of an else statement. That's where it really works. That's the else if idea. You can see it right here. There's the else if idea. If you put an if statement in an else clause, you're really saying, I want this to be true or this to be true, one or the other, mutually exclusive. One of these is true or the other one is true. If I get rid of this, then I'm really checking 2 independent things. If this is true, do something. If it's false, skip over here and check something else. But this could be true and this could be true. Both of these could be true. If you don't have the else here, both of them, so you might do what's in here and you might do what's in here. But when you put the else there, then you're saying you either do this or do that, but not both. You can't do both of them now. Okay, so we run out of time. Okay, so after the we're gonna have class on on Wednesday. So we'll have class. We're gonna finish these examples. We're gonna do a little bit more with this example on Wednesday. Okay, and then the exam will be download. You can download it. You'll have all the rest of the day to work on the exam. Okay, so we'll have class on Wednesday. And since it's a virtual class, we'll go ahead and have the class, and we'll talk about these else if statements. And then you'll have the whole rest of the day to work on the exam. I think that should give you plenty of time. The exam, I'll tell you, the exam is meant to be about an hour's worth of work. It's not a 5-6 hour exam. The exam is meant to be like an hour and 15 minutes worth of work, but you'll have the whole rest of the evening, whole rest of the day to work on it. And you have to upload it to Brightspace by the end of the day. And it'll tell you that I haven't decided exactly what time, maybe midnight or 11 o'clock or so. Okay, so you'll have the whole afternoon and the evening to do the exam. Okay, and if you have questions, let me know. Okay, anybody got any last minute question? Any last minute question? So go ahead, stop sharing. And then see you Wednesday. And in the meantime, if you have questions, please write. See you. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.
Thanks.